All right, welcome everybody to the first episode of the MRG interview series. I'm Todd Rogers, I'm your host, and I am also one of the co owners of Meridian Releasing Group. And today we are talking to Jonathan Zaurin. Jonathan, you there?
I am there. Yes, indeed.
Well, I appreciate you joining us on this first episode. I think I was looking things over, and other than the special collections that we've done, I believe you actually have the most shorts on various volumes of the collective. So I guess that kind of makes you the king of the collectives here.
Oh God. That's because we've done so many. That's why.
Well,
Yeah.
I tell you, every single one of them is is just so good, and
Oh, thank you.
I remember. I guess our first introduction to each other was the pit.
Yeah, yeah. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just remember watching it and getting this feeling of I love the throwback feeling to it. It just kind of had this. It's hard to explain, but I think anybody who knows what I mean when they watch it, they're like, "Oh yeah, I know what he's talking about."
It's old school. Yeah,
Was that the
yeah.
first short that you did then?
Was that the first short? No, the first short that we did was actually portraits. Well, it wasn't the first short that we did. We did one before, but it was a student film, and I wasn't entirely happy with it. Portraits was the first one that we did where I was actually satisfied with the results, and also the first real horror film that we did, Portraits. The Pit was actually the third one that we did, and then obviously Santa Baby being the last one.
Okay, so you did. So Dirt came between those other two.
So Dirt came between Portraits and The Pit, and Dirt is still to this day the most challenging thing we've done. That was hard. That was very hard. That was well, first of all, the duration of it was 35 minutes. So it was to be honest, when we edited it, part of at least the producer thought that we should have just carried on a little bit and then add to it and basically make a feature because it's already 40 minutes long. You
Right.
basically add 30 minutes and you're there, you've got a feature. But there was just on Dirt, first of all, we made that film for £250, which isn't a lot. And then we had about 40 people involved in that film, and fight scenes and multiple locations. It was a challenge. That's why we did it. We did it because we wanted a challenge and we wanted to push. Because, in a sense, Portraits, although complicated in other ways, it was a fairly simple film. There's two characters, and one of them actually spends a lot of time on his own, so it wasn't all that challenging to organize. And then Dirt just came with a whole new set of challenges. Yeah, definitely.
Well, I mean, definitely. I mean, just from a viewer standpoint, I mean, forget about what I know as a filmmaker, but Dirt is. I can see where that would be a complicated shoot. I mean, you said you made that for £250.
Yeah.
That to me is. I mean, that's mind-boggling because the production value and this honestly this goes across everything I've ever seen from you. Your production value is always through the roof, and I know that you've never really dealt with like a large budget for anything, right?
No, definitely not. For me, though, I mean, I'm glad you said that, and I do appreciate that. But that's something that when we start a film, that's always something all of us, everyone that's involved, because I always work with the same people, and everyone that's involved, that's one thing we always have in mind is how do we up the production value. Um, and it goes through things that sometimes it sounds stupid, but they're simple, like lighting, um, acting, framing, the fact that, you know, I always tend to shoot in a ratio of 2:35 because it makes everything look much more cinematic.
Right.
And then, you know, it's simple things like finding locations that actually, you know, a lot of people, what they do when they make a little film like that is they try desperately to, I don't know, to build a set or to have the ideal location that they have in mind. And we sort of have the opposite way of doing things. Is we have a script, and we look at our script and we go, okay, now let's think about it in terms of what's realistic. And so we always rewrite the script with potential locations that we can use, or with locations that we found, and stuff like that. And so that means ultimately that you up the production value because everything is actually real. It's there, you know.
Yeah.
So for example, on Santa Baby, we shot everything in my mother-in-law's house. And then we had a shed from a local shop that we could shoot in. And so we rewrote parts of the script so that it would all fit. And that's what we've done on Dirt. And you know, I mean, the thing with the production value, like, where do I start with that? It's such a complicated issue, but basically, I think for me, the problem I have with a lot of things that I see these days is, specifically with the indies, is I think they're indies by default. So they're indies that sort of aim at the Hollywood game, but they do it because they don't really have a choice. So they don't have a budget, so they make an indie movie, but with Hollywood in mind. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
And,
Absolutely.
and for us, it's not like that. For me, the idea of being indie, it's always been a case of, okay, well, you know, it's a choice. It's a choice that you make because you want to make a film that's a bit weird or a bit original. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to sacrifice the production value. And I think, you know, shooting with a decent camera is another one, and working with decent actors, all of that makes the production value go up, in my opinion. You know, the moment, for me, production value goes down the moment you stop believing in what it is that you're watching. So if you've got a dodgy special effect or an actor that's a bit crap, and you look at that and you go, oh, okay, well, you know, and you stop believing in the film. Does that make sense at all?
Oh, absolutely. And I think the what we've come across, you know, as well, and you know, I can tell you from short films, I have seen probably, you know, over the last couple of years, I've seen probably 1,500 short films just from the fact of before we started this, before we started MRG, I was a program director for the biggest Texas short film festival.
Oh,
And, you know, we knocked in probably 400 or 500 a season, and it was just two of us. So we both watched absolutely everything. That's really kind of what got me going. Was when we started this, I thought there's not enough of an avenue for these filmmakers to get these short films out. I mean, and some of them are just so good. I mean, you can tell the time and the love and the care that people put into making these films. And I feel like, you know, people are just, well, you know, we want a feature. We'd like a feature, you know, we have more to do with it. So that's kind of why we started the collective, was to work on trying to get some more exposure for some of these shorts.
And it's great. It's great because, I mean, you put your finger on something that's really interesting for me. The full disclosure, I also do my own event. I show some short films once every 2 months in Hereford, where I live. And last year we had, because we did it for free last year, so we had 1,500 submissions.
Wow, yeah.
I sat through 1,500 short films, and, you know, no offense, but a lot of these films are terrible. It's all linked, basically. You know, basically with the arrival of digital, we've sort of opened up who can make short films, and that's great. The fact that now everybody can make short films, that is absolutely fantastic, because it means that some talents are getting discovered that would have probably never got discovered before, and that's great. The downside of that is that everyone is now making films. Everyone.
Yeah.
It's for everyone to do. And the problem with that is that it creates that sort of ocean of noise, right?
Right.
On which you have to sort of try and swim and float. Okay. And you have to imagine, so you've got to try and swim and float in that ocean of mostly terrible films. And then you've got some fantastic films, but that have been made with, enormous budgets, and then some great films that have been done with very little. And you have to try and swim in the middle of all that. And I remember having a conversation, funny enough, a conversation with John Carpenter, right, online. And I sent him a film that I'd made. And he said to me, right, he said, look, that's great, but if I watched everything that's ever sent to me, I would never get off the computer, right?
Right.
And that sort of stuck with me because we live in a time where everyone can make short film, but there's so much of it that no one's really got the chance to actually look at it and be discovered through it. And importantly, there is no more distribution circuits for short films because everything's online. What you're doing is great because it sort of gives a physical platform for short films to be shown. And that's what interested me in working with you, really.
And you know what's one of the things that gets me is I keep getting these comments from people, oh, well, physical media is dead. Physical media is dead. And it drives me crazy because, I mean, I'm sitting right now looking in front of my printer, and I have 8 Blu-rays piled up that just came in within like the last week or so that I've purchased. And I still buy physical media, and I know from your Facebook page that you have
definitely
as well. And I don't know. And the one thing I wanted to say, kind of branching off of what you said, I think nowadays, like you said, everybody can make short films or even features, but I don't think everybody should. I really don't.
I mean, this is it's a double-sided issue for me, because how can I explain that? I don't know. Yeah, I sort of tend to agree with you. I don't think everybody should, but it's the same with everything, just because I don't know, just because everybody can potentially become a boxer, it doesn't mean everybody's going to become a great boxer, right?
Right.
It's the same with film. The thing is, at the same time, I'm glad that everybody can, because I'm one of these people. If we hadn't had the digital revolution, would I have even made the films that I made? I don't know. I don't think I would have.
Right.
And so that means that,
I do agree with that for sure. And I think where I'm kind of more going at is, like you said, I mean, like for me, just because I like music, I understand that I don't have any musical talent, so I probably shouldn't start a band. You know what I mean?
No, definitely. But at the same time, I think the thing is, I'm one of those people. I do believe in talent. Sure, I think it's a real thing. I think there are people that are extremely talented, but I also believe I believe in the value of work above talent. So I think if you work at something and you work hard at it, you'll probably get further than people who have talent and don't work, right?
Oh, that's absolute. I completely agree with that.
So I think the issue we have isn't so much about people making short films, right? It's about people making short films and having an instant platform to be able to show them, right?
Yeah.
There is no selection to go on YouTube. You just go on YouTube. And the issue with that is I've made, before I made films that I was happy to show, I made a ton of them that I'm not at all happy to show, that will never be seen. There's no reason for them to be seen. They're not any good by any stretch of the imagination. But what it means is I worked hard to be able to make films where I was actually happy to show. Yeah, I think that there's an issue here. There's a slight issue, and also there's the manner of the content that people like to consume these days. I don't know what room there is for short films in the way that they were before the whole age of the internet, which was, especially if we talk about horror, a lot of horror short films these days, they're sort of constructed on what I call the banana skin short film, which is a construction that leads to a punchline ultimately. There's no real character development. There's no real story, and you can write them by the ton. A guy and his wife are in bed and they hear a noise downstairs, and he goes downstairs and he turns the light on and nothing's there. And when he turns the light off, bam, something's behind him. You can write them on a factory line, you can write 200 of them in an afternoon,
Yeah.
and people love that stuff. And for me, I grew up in a time where short films were about experimenting and trying to find your voice and telling stories in a way that you couldn't do in features, and going a bit crazy, and not necessarily spending a ton of money because you'll never make your money back.
Oh, that is definitely the thing that the one thing I tried to, I think, put forth to a lot of our short filmmakers is that, look, we have developed this project, and these collectives, they take a lot of time for me to put together in
Yeah.
regards to, getting everything, and then, getting it into, I mean, even just from editing standpoint and building timelines and exporting the correct pieces that we need and everything else, and
Yeah. Yeah.
the artwork and everything. But I do this because I really do love these films, and I want people to be able to see them. But like you said, I think it's important for a lot of the filmmakers to go into it with the idea of, look, if I make a couple of bucks, that's great. But the idea here is that my film is now going to be available on a mass market, that hopefully the right person may see what I've done.
That's something I totally agree with. I think if you go into short film thinking you're going to make a ton of money, you're going in for the wrong reason, you know. Um, but just because I'm picking up on what you said earlier about the physical media, physical releases. I mean, surely this crisis we find ourselves in, the COVID-19 crisis that we're in at the moment, that shows that physical media isn't dead. Because if anything, by now I think most of us have been around Netflix 400 times,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
we've all realized that most of the content is of terrible quality, and that there is no old films, there's no classics, there's no really anything of any more than instant value to watch on these. And basically, I think everybody's realized that the choice is quite limited on streaming platforms, not necessarily just Netflix, but everywhere. Whereas the extent of which the physical media are now released, I mean, there's everything on physical media, everything on Blu-ray, everything on DVD. There's
right.
nothing you can't find. You know,
And
I think,
what I did a couple of years ago is I went I went region free on my DVD, on my Blu-ray
yeah,
player, because the one thing I was finding is, like, the one thing I'll say is I am a complete mark for Arrow Video. I mean, they could release the phone book and I would probably buy it on Blu-ray,
yeah,
because it's just their. I love, number one, I love their packaging. I love the fact that they go out and they get all these, extra features to throw on their releases. And I've got a ton of those. And I just, I found that as I was looking at different releases for movies, that I almost think if you're not region free, you're missing out on a whole bunch of stuff
oh, definitely,
that you could
definitely.
be getting. That's for sure.
I mean, definitely. And for us, I mean, for us in Europe, especially, you guys in America, you've got such a ton of stuff as well. So it works. It works both ways too. Um, but yeah, I think you're right as well about the packages. It just sort of recontextualizes the films in what they are, which is a piece of art ultimately.
Yep.
Beyond the whole content. Because for me there's a difference between content and art, right? You can consume content, you can feed on content all day long, but art, there's an appreciation to it. It has a different status, it has a different place. And for me, the physical media, that's what it does. When I get a beautiful edition of The Thing or Candyman or anything like that, it just does not feel the same at all as watching it on a streaming platform.
No, it definitely does not. And I can tell you that, like, one example for me is, and you commented on this one day when, during this kind of lockdown, everybody was posting content on Facebook to keep
Yeah.
themselves from going crazy. And I one day posted, for one of my 10 films that impacted me, a still shot from the movie Vamp, and you actually commented on it. And that's like probably one of my guilty pleasure movies, where I know it's not a great film by any means, but there's something about it that has always, I've always enjoyed, and I probably have. I bet you I have six different physical releases of them. I've got like four media books. I've got some Arrow releases, and then the standard U.S. release. And people will ask me like, "Well, why are you buying the same movie over and over again?" And I think that moves into almost the art idea that you said is beyond the film itself. The packaging is art. I
Yeah,
mean, and it's great to have up on a shelf to look at, and yeah, the
I
movie's the
think
same, but
I
I'd
think
love to have more.
ultimately, people who argue that physical media is dead, they're just not understanding the market. It's for sure that physical media is going to become a smaller part of the market. It's going to change. It's going to become different. And in fact, you're talking about Arrow, and Arrow are a great example of that. They're a great example of a company who's already starting to produce items for collectors.
Yeah.
And this is what's going to happen. Essentially, the Blu-ray, it's going to stop being a mass media, and it's going to become a collector media for people that want to collect things, that like to have films on their shelves, that like to have the packaging, that like to have the extra. So it's going to become a more specialized item. But I don't think it's ever going to disappear.
No,
I mean, look at the vinyl.
and
Still around.
and vinyl's made a major resurgence.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it did kind of go away for a little while. I mean, the collectors still collected,
Yeah,
but the mass audience was not interested in vinyl. But now, over the last few years, it's made a massive resurgence, and it's cool again. I mean, I think everything is cyclical. Things always come
yeah.
around again.
Well, I mean, and for me, I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing that physical media is going to specialize, um, because and you said yourself, you've got many editions of Vamp. It's a very specialized item.
Yeah.
You don't have 5 editions of Transformers 3,
Right.
but you have 5 of Vamp.
Right.
I know many people who have 8 of zombie flesh eaters. I've got 4 or 5 zombie flesh eaters. I don't know how many times I bought the thing. But these are specialized items in the first place, and so it's not necessarily a bad thing that the Blu-ray itself and the physical media is going to become a specialized item in itself.
So here's what I want to do. I'm going to rattle off some questions for you because I'm
Yeah.
curious at your answers, and then after that, I want to give you some time to kind of talk about what you have going on now and
Oh yeah.
what's coming up. But so I'm just going to ramble off some questions and just kind of give me the first thing that pops in your head. So
All right.
all right. So favorite director?
John Carpenter.
God, what a great answer. I knew we were kindred spirits at some point.
It's hard because there are others. I
There
could have
are.
said, I could have easily have said Peter Jackson. But John Carpenter for pure. I think John Carpenter simply because it impacted me so deeply. Just tell you a story quickly, but I had to do, when I was doing my degree, I had to do a bit of research on my own work because you have to self-analyze, and I realized the film I just made was riddled with framing that were completely copied on John Carpenter, and it wasn't something I was conscious. It was
Yeah.
subconscious, and so it impacted me so deeply that it's the one to go for me. Like if I have to take inspiration, it will be from John Carpenter.
Okay. How about what was now? This might be hard to pinpoint, but if you had to pick one movie that you saw that made you want to make movies, what was it?
Uh,
I know it's not easy. I know mine, but it took me a while to figure it out.
Big Trouble in Little China.
That's a
Uh,
great movie. It's got
It's a
so
great
many.
movie, and I saw it. I saw it. I saw it when I was quite young. I think when did it come out? 1984, 1985.
Yeah, I think right around.
I must have seen it in the 90s. I must have been 6 or 7, something like that. And my dad showed me that film, and it was instant, instant love. And I've seen that film more than any other film. I think I've even have a signed copy by John Carpenter.
That's pretty cool. I mean, for me, the movie that always I think that put me into wanting to make movies was Halloween.
Yeah, yeah, I can see why.
And I think that for me, John Carpenter is the influence that he is, because whenever I thought of using the term independent filmmaker, I mean, there's not many that beat Carpenter in the fact that this guy does everything. I mean,
Yeah,
he literally is the complete filmmaker.
yeah.
And I think that's what gets lost and like you said, the framing and things like that, like specifically in Halloween. I mean, people don't realize,
I mean,
but
that's definitely, you were talking about the production value of my films earlier, and that's something else that I got from John Carpenter. It doesn't matter what John Carpenter does, whether it's a comedy or a horror film or a sci-fi film or whatever. And his budgets are always ridiculous, right? And I think most people would be surprised to actually check out the budgets of most of his films.
yeah,
But regardless of what he does, it's always beautifully lit, beautifully photographed, beautifully edited, beautifully acted, beautifully directed. It's just gorgeous. And for me, it's also important to remember that he did that at a time where his style of filmmaking was going completely against the fashion, because the 70s were the times of the new Hollywood and naturalistic photography and the sort of raw edge of Hollywood. And this guy has always fought his corner, and you can find interviews from the time where he's talking about constructing light in his frame and filming in studios and stuff like that. And it's, for me, I always found that fascinating, that sort of thirst for complete independence, complete freedom, but at the same time for creating something that is carefully and beautifully crafted. For me, that summarizes also what it is that I want to do.
right. All right. Let's see. How about what is your? I think everybody has one, whether they admit it or not. What's your favorite zombie film?
I'm going to be completely unoriginal on that. Dawn of the Dead.
Of course, me too.
Yeah.
It's the original Dawn of the Dead is just not. It's one of those films that you just. I don't know. It holds this very special place, I think, for.
It's just defined. It just defined everything else after that. In France, where I originally come from, it's considered the Citizen Kane of genre movies.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, if I wanted to be smart, or I could have said some obscure
Right.
stuff, but no, Dawn of the Dead.
All right. Good. Well, I definitely agree on that. It's it's definitely the classic. It's the benchmark
Yeah.
for
I mean,
zombie.
some people did the zombie differently after that. Like Lucio Fulci has done some really interesting zombies, but George Romero on Dawn of the Dead, he upped and killed the game at the same time, because nobody had any choice but to sort of go for the rules that he instigated with all of that.
Yeah. Okay. How about, is there any actor that you will watch their movies regardless of how good or bad you think they're going to be?
Currently working actors, or
Either or, whatever, whichever way you want to go.
I'd watch pretty much anything with Burt Lancaster. Um, but working actors today, I'd watch anything with Christian Bale. I think is out there today working.
He, yeah, he's a very interesting guy because, as you hear some weird things about him, but when you think about what he puts into his roles, I mean, just take The Machinist right there. I
Yeah,
mean, this guy puts more of himself into his roles than probably most people ever do.
yeah. And I think for me, there's two sides to him, and there's definitely the sort of high performance, crazy, putting on weight, losing weight, looking old, looking young stuff going on with him. But there's also a whole other side to him, where he just produces those really subtle, beautiful performances. And actually, these are the ones that I prefer. Like recently, Scott Cooper's Hostiles.
Hmm.
And there's that shot at the end. Is just, it's a close up of him. It doesn't do anything particularly great. But the shot's beautiful, but it's not a spectacular tracking or anything like that. Just a close up on him, and the range of emotion that goes through that guy's face in one close up, the communication of all the ideas of what's going through the character's mind at that specific time, that for me, that is great acting.
Yeah, no, I
That is,
agree. Well, I got two more for you. One is
Yeah.
off the top of your head, what's your favorite film score? Because I think as filmmakers, we understand truly how important that score is. If it's great, you might not notice, but if it's not good, it stands out like a sore thumb.
That is hard because I absolutely love film music. That's pretty much all I listen to. My favorite film score.
Okay, how about one of your favorite film scores?
One of my
I
favorite.
know it's hard to narrow down.
I love anything by Joe Hisaishi, especially on Kitano's films. Kikujiro and Hanabi and all that stuff. But equally, if I wanted to be an original, let's say also anything by John Carpenter. So there's that thing. Yeah. But Joe Hisaishi, and especially his work on Kitano, although I absolutely love what he did with Ghibli. But with Kitano, there's that sort of simplistic, well, no, not simplistic, but sort of pure thing going on where he creates some absolutely heartbreaking, beautiful, romantic scores. They're just so powerful that you can easily listen to them on their own and get a brand new discovery every time you listen to them, and brand new images in your mind every time you listen to them. And I do go back to them quite a lot.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good choice, I think. So here's the last one now, and this is kind of I think maybe is a catch-22 because I think maybe sometimes as filmmakers we think that greatness should be left alone, but if you could head up, direct any remake of a film that you would want to redo, what would it be?
Remake. If I could remake anything, what would it be?
Yeah.
That's tricky.
It's a tough one because I think for most of us, when we love a film, we think it should be left alone and not, don't mess with it. You don't need to redo it again. But I'm just wondering, one that maybe you'd like to add your own special touch to.
That is a really tricky question. Let me think just for a second. What would I remake? If I could remake anything, what would it be? I'll tell you what it would be. It would be the first Hellraiser.
Ah, very interesting.
Do you know why?
No, please tell me.
I love the idea of the
Right.
movie. I just don't love the movie. It's one of those really odd one where I know it's a classic. I know people love it. I don't have a problem with people loving it. I'm not saying it's a bad film. I just think it's got such a sort of vaudeville thing going on with the husband and the wife, and I always prefer the second one because all of a sudden it sort of blew up that whole demon world wide open, and it was just crazy and surreal and insane, And the first one I always found sort of like, I'm gonna get shot for this, but I always found it a bit tame. Do you know what I mean? I don't know.
No, I actually know exactly what you mean. I think you're absolutely right, and I think it
There's
has.
some great stuff in it. I mean, the scene where Frank comes out of the floor, and there's some fantastic things. I think it's just one of those films where I always remember it better than it is because it in a way that's great because it plays on the imagination so well that you always remember those insane creatures, the dragon at the end. And actually, every time I rewatch it, I remember that there isn't. There's more happening in my head than there is on the screen. It's odd, but
Yeah,
I mean, ultimately, I don't think I would choose to ever remake anything. But
yeah, I
if
agree. I think
if I didn't have a choice and I was you have to remake this, it would be Hellraiser. Yeah.
yeah. For me, I think because I was asked that question once, and I gave an answer right away, but then when I thought about it, I thought, I don't know if this is accurate. My initial answer was The Warriors.
Oh yeah, interesting.
Because I just thought that, I love the movie so much, but and that's what popped into my head right away. And I'm like, oh well, I think Tony Scott was actually scouting
Yeah, he was. Yeah,
expectations when he passed,
he
and
was even planning on working with actual gangs and stuff. I mean, that guy was absolutely batshit crazy. I love Tony
yeah,
Scott.
And I think
Yeah.
for me, when I thought about it, though, I thought maybe I changed my mind because I don't know if in today's society you could recapture the kind of the thought process that went into that movie. And also, if you think about it, nowadays you would have them running around, and everybody would just be getting shot. You know,
Yeah. Well, yeah.
having a gun in that movie was like, holy cow, he's got a gun. I mean, everything else was your kind of your kind of stereotypical early gang fighting where they fought with chains or just with their fists, or of course maybe the greatest gang in the world with baseball bats.
Yeah.
I
I think
always
what's potentially great about remaking the Warriors, though, is that the structure of it is actually adaptable to plenty of different contexts, in a sense. I mean, there was a time where I was toying with the idea of making a sort of um, of a mix of the Warriors and Apocalypto, because actually I think these films are oddly similar. Because it's basically it's a survival, it's a film about survival, and
yeah,
you could apply it to anything, and any era, any time, any context. um, but what I want to say about remaking, this is why it's a tricky question for me, is that although for example, I recognize the shortcomings of something like Hellraiser for myself, at the same time I don't have the pretension that I could do it any better at all, ever.
right. No,
So
yeah, I
it's
understand.
you know
Yeah, I think the one thing with the Warriors that got me, and it's always been a big part of me, because I mean, I grew up in New York,
yeah.
so I mean, I've been to Coney Island. The Wonder Wheel. I know the Wonder Wheel. And I think that is one of those things when you can physically put yourself into a place where one of your favorite movies actually took place. I think
Yeah.
it takes on a whole new meaning for you and for what that film means for you. But now I agree with you. I definitely don't ever think that I don't have the arrogance to believe that I could take Escape from New York and make it any better than it was originally, you know, all that kind of stuff. But I think it's always just one of those kind of fun things to think about, when you think about making
I,
stuff.
I'm not against it as such. The concept of the remake isn't something that I'm against. There's plenty of films that I was talking about The Thing earlier, and it's a remake. The Fly, David Cronenberg's The Fly. I think for me it entirely depends on the idea behind the remake. Like, is it an artistic intent? Is it someone that looked at something and went, you know what, I think I could bring my own spin on that and make it completely different and make it mine? Or is it a studio going, right, we have a back catalog of things for which we have the rights and we just need to keep the franchise going, and so we're just going to keep dishing out these remakes and reboots, and they're just crap one after the
Yeah.
other.
And I've always said the same thing. It's where's the originality? Why does everything have to be a sequel or a remake or a
Yeah.
reboot or something based?
Yeah, but do you know what? Why not? Why not sequels? Why not remakes? If the guy that's doing this is going, actually, I have a great idea for a sequel, or actually, I have a
Right.
great idea for a remake. But that's not really what's happening.
No,
What's
and I think
happening is you
that's
have
why I get that
studios.
point of view is because it's
Yeah,
not what's happening.
no, it's not. What's happening is you have studios that have licenses and franchises, and what they're doing is they're hiring people who sometimes you even wonder why they chose this specific guy to dish out a remake
Yeah.
of whatever it is that they're doing, and then they just do a remake. I mean, I
I'll
don't
tell
know
you
if
I'll
anybody's
tell you
seen Black
this.
Christmas last year, but
Oh yeah, I did not see I didn't see the most recent one.
talk about something that made zero sense from the start. There's nothing
I
in that director's portfolio that would suggest that making Black Christmas would be a good idea. It's
mean,
just
the movie that bothers me the most, honestly, is all right. Another one of my favorite movies is The Crow. I really believed. I mean, to me, it was so wonderfully shot. The atmosphere was so well done. Brandon Lee was incredible.
Yeah.
And then you turn around and make 3 or 4 sequels, and essentially it's just the same movie, but not done anywhere near as well.
No.
So it's like, why are you doing? And I used to get mad, like you're killing his, like you're killing the idea of what he did in this movie by making all of these garbage sequels.
Well, I mean, for me, it's all about it's like I said, it's all about intent, and also, I mean, not always, mostly about intent. Sometimes it's also about whether it's nonsensical. My one of my great bugbear recently was Suspiria.
Yeah,
Even before I saw the result, I was, what was the point of remaking Suspiria? I mean, I don't think anyone's ever watched Suspiria going, do you know what's really great about that movie is the plot. The plot is
yeah,
so rich that you could bring some insane twist and your own identity to it. It was a purely experimental film, which Argento went into with the idea of experimenting and doing some insanely artistic and beautiful shots all the way through, and create an atmosphere and a mood and a film that was entirely unique. And the one thing you really never really remember about it is the plot, because nobody cares.
that's
And
absolutely
so
right.
what is the point? It would be like making a remake of Eraserhead, right?
Right.
Why?
Yep.
What's the
And,
idea? You know?
all right. So what I want to do before we wrap up here, and I think you and I could discuss these things forever, but I don't want to bore everybody out there.
No, definitely,
So,
definitely.
but they what I want to give you some time to do is tell everybody about what you're working on now, what you have going on, and what you're looking to get done here.
So we are currently working towards making our first feature. I say we. I don't speak of myself in the third person. I say we because it's always the same group of people. It's not just me. And we are currently trying to get a feature film made called Wyvern Hill. And it's going to be a super low budget independent feature film written by one of Doctor Who's screenwriters, Keith Temple. And hopefully, I mean, we were supposed to start shooting this summer. Obviously, with the crisis currently happening worldwide, it's looking very unlikely that we'll be shooting this summer. But currently, we are looking to shoot probably around September, maybe October. The cast is assembled, the production team is assembled, the script is locked, and so we're just looking for a little bit of money to be able to put together some decent special effects, basically.
It's exciting, and I know that that I have spoken to you about helping out any way that I can, because
Yeah.
frankly I'm super excited about the idea of seeing what you guys can do, on a feature level. And again, like I said, I've always told you I'm a huge fan of you, but I'm a big fan of your team, because I know as a filmmaker you can't do this stuff by yourself.
No, you don't, and that's very important. I always try to build a sort of family atmosphere around what it is that we do. Bring on new people by telling them, this is a tightly knit group. We're sort of one unit, and it's not about ego or about anything like that. It's about all together creating films.
Right. And I agree. It's always about coming together,
Yeah.
create something that you can all be very proud of.
Yes, absolutely. I
You,
mean, for me, it's great that we have some good films at the end. But I mean, it is great that we have good films at the end. But what I enjoyed, what I enjoy more is being on shoot with people that you are creating a sort of adventure that you'll remember for a long time, and you creating links with other people and friendships, and sometimes it doesn't always work. We've had situations where we've had people who didn't gel, or some members of the team who didn't like working with us. So it happens, but mostly we are a really close. In fact, you've been on the group chat now, and you can tell that we all know each other very well.
yeah.
Yeah. Um,
Well, I'll tell you this, I definitely look forward to being able to help in any way that I can. I think it's going to be something very special, and I'm just happy to that you've thought enough to let me possibly
oh,
be.
definitely no. You're gonna, for me, and that goes with what I was saying to you about creating a sort of little family and all that. Is that I also don't tend to forget what people do for us, and what you did for us with the distribution of our short films and all that. There was absolutely no reason for me not to include you in what it is that we're trying to do, basically. There was no reason at all, and I'm really looking forward to working with you on this stuff.
I
I,
think,
I realized I forgot to tell what the film's actually about.
yeah, that might be that might be a good point, especially if there's anybody out there that might want to throw a few dollars this way.
Well, actually, yeah, if people do want to throw a few dollars our way, that would be really good, especially because we don't necessarily expect to be given the money. Obviously, we are planning on trying to sell this little film and get people their money back, essentially. But the film's about it's about a 60 years something woman called Beth, and she's starting to develop symptoms of Alzheimer, and so she makes the difficult decision of buying a house with her daughter and her son-in-law. Except because of a symptom or a link to reality isn't always great, and so she doesn't realize that something has moved in with her, basically, and it gets into very dark places from there. Um, Without saying too much, without spoiling.
I think that's a good description. I mean, I've read it a couple of times now, and it is it's got some really great moments, and I cannot wait to see this get put onto film. I think it's going to be great. So,
Well,
well,
I hope so. I mean, we've taken the chance of being in lockdown to rework the script so many times now. There's been so many versions of it with tiny, minute details being changed and scenes being rewritten. And for me, you start with a great script. It doesn't mean you'll get a great film, but you start with a great script, you're increasing your chances to have a great film on your hands, definitely.
yeah, it's definitely a good start. That's for
Yeah.
sure. So, well, Jonathan, I appreciate you coming out and being a part of this very first interview session that we're going to keep doing.
Yeah,
I hope people enjoy them, and I think it's always fun to kind of hear what other people are doing and what they've done, and hopefully that can help inspire or help motivate people to do more or to get better at what they're doing. And
I hope so.
so I do appreciate you coming on here,
No,
and
no, thank you.
I'm sure that we'll probably have you on again as you get ready to get into production. Maybe we can get
Absolutely. Oh, I'd be happy to. I'd be happy to chat to you anytime.
so again, thank you for being part of our family, and
Thank you.
thank you for getting on here. And we will talk again soon.
Absolutely.